Good morning and welcome to Talk It Out Tuesday, where normally we would answer the questions that you provide, but today we're going to talk out another issue. You may or may not be aware of the sexual abuse issues that are going on among the Christian community and in church life. It is a problem. It's a problem that not only the state of Texas Convention, the Baptist General Convention of Oklahoma, has recently addressed, but the Southern Baptist Convention at its annual meeting in Nashville this last June also took up and addressed and sent a message of approval to the executive committee of the Southern Baptist Convention to handle as well. Today, I have with me a special guest that can speak to these matters and help us unpack a few of these things that are going on. Christine Highfill has her education in counseling and social work at the master's level, and is also currently working on her doctorate. So, Christine, welcome to the show today. I appreciate you being here. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and maybe for the sake of the audience, why is it you can speak to this issue?
Right, thanks. Well, first of all, probably most of our audience knows me not as Christine Highfill, but rather as Marilyn Hurd's daughter, Mary. Yeah. And I've decided to adopt a new name when I entered my doctoral program so that I could separate my work from my family life. And
Understood.
The reason that I've done that specifically is the work that I do is very sensitive. It involves domestic abuse in a military context, as well as clergy sexual abuse in the Christian community. Mm-hmm. So I wanted my family to have a little bit of separation between what I do as a professional and what their life experiences are.
Exactly.
And an important part of my research is that I have experienced domestic abuse in a military and a Christian context. Mm-hmm. So my experiences give me the ability to ask insightful questions.
Yes.
But my training gives me the skills to answer those questions rigorously rather than from personal opinion.
Absolutely. So the experiences that you've had and the education that you have gained kind of are a hand-in-hand situation. Mm-hmm. One leads to the other and helps on both accounts. So
that's right.
So what are you finding? What are you finding? I know your current research is in the military and sexual abuse in the military. What findings do you have? What are you getting? What are you finding?
So I did the first international study of survivor narratives, and I was able to look at the stories that survivors told to researchers in the United States and in the UK. And what we found that even across the pond, the military impacts the experience of domestic abuse.
Okay.
It impacts the reporting of abuse. It impacts what happens after the reporting. And the connection to the military makes things significant, even though the actual physical act of abuse may be very similar to what a civilian experiences. Mm-hmm. Being able to navigate that is largely controlled by culture, by policy, and by power dynamics or authority structures. So a colleague of mine asked me if I would be interested in doing a study on clergy sexual abuse.
Wow.
So we designed a similar study. It's what's called secondary data. We're not interviewing folks right now. We're looking at what have other researchers found and putting together everything that the researchers have done for the last 10 or so years and synthesizing it into one document. And we're finding similar things, that the culture of the church really impacts the experience of abuse.
Right.
The survivor in a military context may endure abuse as an act of loyalty or patriotism to her combat spouse, because he has suffered so much for us, for our nation, that if I can help him reduce his stress by taking some punches, then I need to do that to protect the mission. In the church context, rather than protecting the mission as much, we have to protect the reputation, or victims feel they must protect the reputation of the church, or they feel like their abusers, particularly if they happen to be clergy, are in the position of God. So it's not just a one-on-one dynamic about what occurs in private. It's influenced by the policies that our churches have, that our denomination has, as well as the cultural ideals.
So why, this is off topic a little, but
sure,
why is this happening in amongst clergy? Well, I mean, what are you gathering? What are you finding? I mean, what are the reasons behind why this is happening? Is it no different than anybody else, or are we finding some other ideas here?
So that's a really great question. And my research concentrates on survivors, not with perpetrators, though I have a colleague who works specifically on the perpetrator side of the equation, because I really believe that if we're going to make a difference, we have to address both. We can't just simply vilify somebody who does a vile act and make the problem go away. We do need to get down to those root whys and begin to address them. So I don't know the whys, but I do know the hows. And that is that clergy who will perpetrate, and this is not all clergy, but those who will perpetrate are able to identify vulnerable people. And they're able to put them through what's called a grooming process. So it starts very informally, then a little bit of extra attention. And then the extra attention maybe goes to gifts or times. Frequently, victims are children of single parents. And so that single mom is looking for help and an adult male to provide some guidance to their children. And so this help is often very welcomed. And because the pastor occupies a trusted position, trust is more naturally given without a lot of the defense mechanisms that moms might otherwise have. And so we create these scenarios in which somebody who is vulnerable to the sin of perpetrating sexual violence on another is now given the power and access to execute their sin under the auspices of a church.
Are we finding that most of the abuse happening is adult to child? I know a lot of the news reports of some executives at the convention level, the allegations stemmed more from inappropriate words, inappropriate touches, and that was more adult to adult. So what are we finding in your survivorship? What age range are we finding the majority?
So in my specific project, we're only looking at children who were abused. So in my sample, it's 100%. But clearly, that does not represent what's going on in the world. And I think that what we need to look at is a couple of things. I provided in the show notes some documentation from the United States Department and from the state of Texas. And the State Department document tells us that through case attrition, which is when officials just simply drop cases off the docket and for any variety of reasons. So we know that less than 20% of adult women will report a sexual assault. Once it's reported, then it has to be, the perpetrator has to be arrested. And then after arrest comes investigation. And sometimes the investigation and arrest, it can go either way, depending on the circumstances of the case. And then it makes it to court. But by the time it gets to court, the victims that make it into a court setting tend to be men, they tend to be children, and they tend to be women who were raped by strangers. So what makes it to the court, what makes it into our numbers are those cases that society would generally regard as specifically deviant. And so we don't really have great numbers. Because we let those things, the inappropriate touches, the sexual harassment of words, we don't tend to act on those as a larger society. So it's harder for us to gauge prevalence.
I sit on the executive board for the Baptist General Convention of Texas and was present at the discussion time of a recent policy that was added to, it was an addendum to a policy in human resources in these areas. And basically it, in a nutshell, it is stating that any sexual offender or registered sexually offender should be permanently disqualified from serving in leadership. And so I'd like for us to break that down a little bit. In my mind, there's a couple of parts to that, and would like to hear your thoughts on that as well. The first part for me would simply deals with the registered sex offender. In the show notes today, we also have the definition of that and what's going on with that and what that really means. And so this policy that came out in an effort to help guide churches, we can't tell churches what to do. That's the cooperative nature of Baptist work. There's not a hierarchical structure. There's a cooperative structure. fellowship, if you will, which comes into play here. But that they should be permanently disqualified from serving in leadership positions. Now, I raised the question, and it's out there, but I raised the question in that meeting. Help me define what leadership position is, because are we talking about a committee position? Are we talking about a teaching position? Are we talking about a ministry position? I view those a little differently. What are your thoughts in that regard?
So this is challenging, and we may differ on this one a little bit.
Hey, that's okay. You don't have to, but this is not a have to agree moment. I get it.
Because I've seen the absolute devastation that sexual abuse causes children or adults, either gender.
Yep.
I'm going to take the most conservative stance.
My wife does the same thing. You and her are cut from the same cloth on that deal.
But let me give you, let me like open the window and let me explain it out a little bit. So sexual abuse, rape, a number of things, it's not about sex. It's not about intercourse. It's not about pleasure. It is power. Mm-hmm. So the question then becomes, why are we going to endow someone that we know has abused power before in a position of executing power? And I feel that because they are representatives of Jesus, and leadership positions in churches that's how we perceive them, that we need to really make sure that there will not be harm caused in the name of Jesus. Now, I'm going to give a little caveat, maybe put a little fuel on your fire. Recidivism rates are fairly low at the beginning. We know that in the first few years, and you can find this on the State Department site in the show notes, the first few years, and it depends on how you define recidivism, is very technical, but about 3%. So you're looking at 100 folks who've been on the sexual offenders list. 3 years later, only 3 of them have reoffended. So it kind of feels and sounds like, well, that sounds like but over time, it's a good bet. But over time, it changes. Yep. And so we know that more than a quarter will reoffend within 15 years. And if you look at the length of time that somebody is on the offender list, that could be part of that dynamic when they go off. So if it's about power, and then in the same way that I would have instructed a client of mine a few years ago in a rehab facility, your trigger is alcohol, don't go to a bar. That's right. If power is what we're talking about in an abuse situation, then maybe we should not take them to the bar. Don't put them in positions of power where they're going to have that opportunity. So yes, so taking the most conservative position, no sense of authority or leadership in any capacity is where you would follow the line of that. That is my personal conviction. Yes. That is not the opinion of my university or anyone who supports me. Right. But I would like to say that there are plenty of ways to minister. Sure. In non-leadership capacities. Sure. And if there's an individual who has committed a crime and has gone through treatment and has come to saving knowledge in Jesus Christ and has truly repented and changed, we need to facilitate their service to the church. Right. It does not, I still maintain it should not be in leadership. Right. And if that individual is bucking for a leadership position, we have to ask why. We do have to ask why. We have to ask why. The question it's not about forgiveness and our beliefs about the gospel. Right. It is about, why are they bucking for power? Over whom will they exercise that power? Right. What are the risks of them having that power? Right. And who will bear the greatest burden of that risk? And in that analysis, we will most often find that it is our children and our vulnerable adults that will bear the burden of our poor decisions. You know, the balance and the tightrope of grace and law is a tough one to walk some days, because on the one side, as you have mentioned, we hope and we seek that people would come to a state of repentance, a state of forgiveness, a state of a relationship by faith in Jesus Christ, at which point God has removed their sin guilt before him,
but we still hold that up. And so that's, I think, where it kind of gets sticky in some cases as to where does this fall. And I like what you're saying, that there are places to serve. It doesn't have to be in places of authority, but there are many places that you can serve. Do you there? I was doing some research too there, and I know you fully well know there are when somebody's released from conviction, there's they have to register themselves. They're given a leveling number.
That is correct.
A 3 is, this guy is highly likely to return. 1 is they're a low risk. There's not, for whatever reason, either they rehabilitated well or I don't know. But
and it also involves the nature of their crime.
Right.
So somebody who breaks into a home, kidnaps somebody, commits sexual offenses against them, kills them, poses a much greater risk to society than somebody at a stoplight who flashes somebody.
Right.
So the type of sexual crime is an important piece to the leveling system. It's also an important piece to the recidivism issue.
A person that leaves the bar drunk and exposes himself at the corner while he's relieving himself is a sexual offender and will be registered as such, but they may be a 1 versus somebody who was a more violent situation as a 3. Do you, in that moment, in this concept of allowances and different things, is a level 1 viewed differently in your mind than a level 3? They're both registered.
Right.
And if I just go out and say who's a registered sex offender, I'm going to get a list and I may not see the number. Do we it's a blanket statement? If you're registered, that's your problem and we're just done with you? Or do you, in your mind, see a difference between a 1 and a 3 when it comes to positional opportunities?
So regarding positional opportunities, in the state of Texas, schools are considered safe places for children. It's a very specific designation because of the high level of security those children have. And part of that is registered sex offenders can't interact with them.
0 tolerance.
None.
Yeah.
Because we have very vulnerable children.
Absolutely.
Children who can't make a decision about crossing the street after a ball, right? Like their frontal cortexes, they're just, bless them.
Yeah.
But they need us to protect them.
Right.
Our children in churches, our mission friends, our GAs, our RAs, our youth, our vulnerable adults, they need us to protect them.
Yes.
And I think that the question goes back to, what are we doing to protect the children? Not how close to the line are we willing to go.
Right.
For
how much am I willing to protect them?
Right. The issue has to come back to the safety of those in our midst who are most vulnerable. And that comes before making allowances for really sad and bad decisions that somebody might have made while they were drunk. And perhaps that wasn't an abuse of power because they were just drunk and had to pee. But it was a bad decision.
Right.
And bad decisions
speaks to judgment too.
It does speak to judgment. Bad decisions have consequences.
Yes.
And can I look at somebody who has never been to a church but has a brand new baby and is up to here with brand new babiness and begins to realize I need help, and a friend goes to a church, so the friend invites the friend to mom's day out. Can we look at that new mom and say, yeah, we recognize that schools would protect your child, your daycare would protect your child, but we are more interested in making sure that somebody who's made really bad decisions feels loved and accepted by us. We mar our reputation among non-believers because we make decisions that don't protect children because we are so interested in making somebody feel forgiven about their decisions. But forgiveness is a fact.
And it's not without consequence.
Absolutely. And forgiveness and trust are different.
You can be forgiven, but you still have to face the consequences of that decision.
That's right.
That you made. And that's a hard one in our culture that we have today of just let everything go.
Right.
And it's hard. And that seeps into our church, I think, sometimes as well.
So I think maybe we can think about it this way. Church leadership is not everybody gets a participation prize award.
Right.
Right. The Bible has different standards for leaders.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
So I think that we need to recognize the importance of making sure that those in leadership have good judgment. That's it. Paul tells Timothy that. Make sure your leaders have a head on their shoulders.
Right. And that's I know that there are those the ones that are coming to mind or that have come into the news are not people that were in a out of Christianity position, performed these acts and come into a Christian relationship. Many times we're talking about people that are already claiming Jesus and having these issues, and that's just unacceptable.
And I will say, and we may be veering off the road a little bit here, but some of our theology supports the harboring of abuse, and it supports the commission of some acts of abuse.
Yes. Specifically the subjugation passages of Paul.
And how we apply them.
Right. Which we may not get into on this one. We may come back for that one. In the meantime, go read The Making of Biblical Womanhood. You've heard me talk about that already on Dads with Coffee a couple of weeks ago. I was
put that one back in the show notes.
Speaking onto that one. But there is a conversation, I think, to be had amongst the conservative theological of Christendom, is that we need to deal with this patriarchal situation. And is it Pauline or is it Roman? Which one is it really? Is it really in the Pauline corpus, or is it something that he was using a rhetorical argument in the straw man approach as he does in Romans? Was he also doing that in Corinthians? And if he was doing that in Corinthians, we need to really re-look at some things, because women in leadership is apparent in the New Testament. Women in leadership is apparent until the Reformation. And if that's true, which history seems to prove that out, we need to be aware. And the reason that we bring this up is because if we take it to its absurd end, the subjugation of women, that the man's in charge of the woman, that puts it into a power-based structure that can open the door, specifically for those that are tempted by this, can open the door to abuse of position.
Right. And so to use your analogy, it's giving somebody a key to the bar.
Yes. It's like, and we preached on, the church approves what you're doing.
That's right.
I mean, this is essentially what Paige Patterson did in his office with, the individual, go home and deal with it.
And I will say, he said those when he was a very young pastor. And I have millennial children, and I would hate for them to be judged on the decisions that they make now, 30 years from now.
Hey, I'm just thankful social media wasn't around when I was in high school. I'm just saying.
But here's the thing. He did not grow from that. And
it didn't change.
It did not
adjust.
So I think that's an important part of the issue. And that is the same advice that I received from California to Virginia from multiple pastors. That is built into our system. Go home and pray. Be submissive. If you did X, Y, and Z, then your husband won't do these things. And that's a message that the church gives survivors and victims. Right. If you would have done blah, 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 then this wouldn't have happened. If you would have dressed differently, if you would have come from a better home. We don't say these things out loud.
Some people do.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
There are some.
But part of who we put in leadership puts the onus on us to make good decisions, and not on young children to protect themselves or vulnerable people to protect themselves. The onus is on us to put people in leadership who will execute the job with integrity and with safety.
I hear a lot, or I read a lot of conversations that are happening amongst 20-somethings. And on the female side, they're saying, teach your boys to stop looking at me that way. And on the male side, I'm hearing, stop dressing that way. And as a woman, where do you come at that? You've got boys and girls you have raised and are raising.
Yes.
Where do you fall on that? I mean, because I have a son and a daughter, and I've tried to express to them both ends of that spectrum. As a grown up man now, he's 20. Don't look at women in that capacity. But as a man, it's hard for me because of the sexual nature in which we've been wired, and in the fall rewired. It's hard to get away from a scantily dressed individual. And so I don't think culpability is only on one side. I think there's culpability both ways. What say you?
So I believe, yes, there's culpability on both sides, but I think that, and this is taking it to its absurd.
Sure. Which is where Gen Z takes it on social media. So,
but if a woman is walking without a stitch of clothing down the street, is she asking to be raped? She is not.
No, she's not.
She may be making a really poor decision.
Sure.
She may be making a legal decision in San Francisco.
Oh, right.
Okay,
yeah,
so
right. Yes.
Or on any number of world beaches.
And to be clear, I don't think that any woman is ever asking to be raped. Ever. I don't think that's never something they want. They never want that. And but it's a tough issue. Yes, a man should not look at a woman that way. And at the same time, I think dress modestly, and it's a both and.
And I think that how we define modesty is also really, it's really important. I teach English as a second language, and part of my dress code is like, this would be considered inappropriate. But in America, this is fine. But I would have to have something higher up on my neck. So I think that we need to take cultural context into account. I think that we need to be kind to one another.
Absolutely.
And view one another as essentially human rather than essentially as objects of sex or actors of sex.
So back to the policy that's been enacted by Texas Baptists. The second half of that deals with that from a state's position, that right now, as I said, it's a cooperative effort. And the recommendation coming out of the executive board for the policy would be that if churches violate the first clause, that there would be strong conversations about disfellowshipping or disassociating ourselves from that. Now, in some senses, that really doesn't do anything, because we believe that every church has the right to do whatever they want to do. We cooperate together, but the state would at least make the statement, we disagree with you so badly on this that we want nothing to do with you. We're not going to allow you to be affiliated with us, good or bad. We're not going to affiliate ourselves with you, and you're not allowed to affiliate with us. And what are your thoughts about excising churches from fellowship?
I will begin this by saying I've just begun the policy analysis on this. So I've only looked into some state and federal things that are related. I really haven't dug down into the Baptist polity. So let me ask a question of you. Is this the only reason that the Baptist General Convention of Texas would excise?
No, there are other lifestyle choices among ministerial leadership that they. And it's not a situation where, okay, we heard about this, so automatically you're out. There's conversations that lead up to that. But this isn't the only situation. In Baptist life, we don't accept that homosexual lifestyle is one that should be in a clerical or a clergy position. And that would be another conversation and SBC has disassociated with churches over that issue as well. They disassociated with churches over hosting marriages in a homosexual lifestyle. So And I know that's a hot button too. This is not the only reason why they would disassociate with him. That would be one other reason that they would disassociate with them. And yet we allow a lot of other things. And so sometimes I feel like we cherry pick.
Yeah. Well, we do. I didn't even know that. I think that's probably an objective reality. We do. We pick our battles. But Rachel Den Hollander wrote a book called What's a Girl Worth? And that book is also in the show notes. And she asked the question, what is a little girl worth?
Right.
And is a child's life worth saying this far and no further? And you've crossed the line and you've put little children in danger. And Jesus had very strong words for people who put children in danger. And we know that sexual abuse is not only a danger physically, we know that not only does sexual abuse, particularly of children, negatively impact their mental health, we also know, and this is from the preliminary work that I've done with my colleague, that sexual abuse that occurs in a church context negatively impacts that individual's ability to connect with Jesus Christ. So,
because the relationship at church has been tainted, and that taints the opportunity. Right.
And the pastor is often very connected, especially in the mind of a child who's concrete, connected with Jesus, and for a whole host of other things. And I haven't done enough research to really go deep, but we know that people who are abused in church context frequently disfellowsh themselves.
Right.
Because being in a place where abuse is tolerated and accepted, and where abusers are put in positions of power, is intolerable.
Right.
And so they punch out. And we need to make a choice. Are we going to be the safe place for our children and for our vulnerable adults? And I believe that includes not just our individual congregations, but what does the culture of Texas Baptist? What is the culture of Texas Baptist? And as my studies have shown in the military and in church sexual abuse, culture really does impact the experience and outcomes of the abuse survivor.
And I mean, I do applaud the leadership of the BGCT to bring this to bear. I appreciate that they have brought this, because, we need to be making these choices. If a school can be considered a safe place and no tolerance, what greater responsibility should we have as a church to also create safe spaces and be the safe space among all safe spaces? We should be the safe space.
We should be.
And yet we're also a hospital for the sick and the ill. So, but I think that we just need to, that doesn't mean that we have to let them into leadership.
That's right.
Find a way to serve and understand that we love you in Christ's name. But that does not mean that you get to be in this situation.
And supervision in ministry would be important. And this is just me. But supervision would be extraordinarily important, because the grooming process can begin with things that are barely noticeable.
And I know it's in the show notes. Ministry Safe offers training in this.
That's right.
And that's something that I think every church needs to go through. And I've been through that training. Don't eat before you go through that training. I mean, it is very unnerving, the training that they give, but I think that it's very necessary for us to understand that we can talk about we live in a fallen world, but so many Christians in the local churches are so protected from so many things. They don't understand the fallenness of our world. This grooming process, we've got to be super careful about that. Well, the SBC has been in the news the last couple of weeks also, as the messengers, and I don't know how many thoughts you have on this as well, but the messengers stated that they wanted an independent review board to come in, not a group of people from the SBC, but an independent board to have the integrity and the authenticity to come in and review any and all allegations stemming back to 2000, in order to encompass any and all allegations, whether it was at an executive level or whether it was in one of the cooperative churches, these allegations, and was there any lack of response that should have happened, and just the investigative work to decide, okay, should something have been done and we didn't do it? Did somebody know something and didn't say it? And all the things. And so the messengers voted overwhelmingly that yes, we want that. And we also voted, because I was a messenger in attendance. Thank you to our local church for allowing me to have the voice to represent us and our interests at the national level, which is why you go to convention. It's not like other conventions. It's basically a national business meeting
yes.
that you go to. And so we approved that, and we approved the waiving of any client attorney privileges in regards to any of those allegations in order to unearth truth. And so the executive committee of the Southern Baptist Convention met, and they quickly voted, yes, we want this independent review board. Guidepost has been introduced into that. And so Guidepost is the entity that will be doing the research and the investigative work. However, the attorney-client privilege was not approved the same day. They met for hours, then they tabled it for 7 days, and they spent hours in debate. They tabled it another 7 days, and then finally they had a majority vote according to their bylaws. They had to have X number of percentage. They reached that percentage. I and some others were frustrated that it took 14 days to do this. I see you shaking your head up and down. What are your thoughts about that? Because it was not a complete waive of privileges; it was selective waive.
Yes.
What do you know about this? What are your thoughts about this?
So I've been a parent for 26 years.
Yes.
And my children learned very early, delayed obedience is disobedience. If I tell you to do something, I expect you to do so in a reasonable amount of time.
But you don't know all that.
Right. And you're going to get hit by a semi driving down the car.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, but I can't do that right now because I've got all these other things to do. And
so
I've got those excuses.
Yes. We've all heard them.
And I feel that this was kind of that level.
This is what I was watching a lot of it transpire across social media. And I was looking into some other things, and really it sounded like an argument I have with my 14-year-olds.
Right.
And and that's problematic for me. And I think it speaks to not just a polity issue of failing to address the messengers. And that's how Baptists work. We have messengers that make the decision.
Right.
And they departed from that. And they
or at best paused.
Yes. Thinking through the whole process of it. But so there's, in my perspective, there was some arrogance that was involved there. Now, okay, I know we are talking millions of dollars. I know that the SBC has huge assets. I know that our executive council has fiduciary responsibilities. But I also believe with all of my heart that if we were to ask Jesus whether he wants us to take care of our checkbook or whether he wants us to take care of injured people, he would say every time injured people.
Absolutely.
And they failed to do this. And I have had...
And the prime example of that is the anointing of Jesus by Mary.
Yes.
Because they complained that money could have been spent on all of these other things. And yet Jesus in this scenario is saying, but she's the injured person here. And I need to care for her more than concern myself with the value of what's involved.
That's right.
She is valued higher than the money you could have gained from selling that oil.
Right. And in fact, whose oil was it? The oil belonged to Mary.
Mm-hmm.
Bodies belong to the individual to whom God has given them.
Right.
And other people don't have a right to violate that, just like the individuals didn't have a right to tell Mary how she was going to spend the money wrapped up in that oil.
Right.
But again, we've got a power structure. And because the executive committee is in a position of power, they can delay 14 days.
Right.
Perpetrators don't delay.
No.
14 days of sexual abuse.
Yeah.
That's a lot of abuse can occur during that time.
Right.
And the other thing that I'm disturbed by is that, to me, they felt unresponsive. They felt I received their actions, their delaying, their filibustering almost as ignoring the actual issue which is before them, which is, in the name of God, we have hurt people.
Right.
And
shouldn't we do all that we can to fix that?
Yes. And our convention has shown on numerous occasions the inability to really hear survivor stories.
Mm-hmm.
So back in 2018, when Paige Patterson's, when Southwestern was dealing with all the accusations against Dr. Patterson, I sent the letters. I sent all of the entire board of trustees, and later on all of the seminary presidents, a letter that outlined when Dr. Patterson gave an apology. He said, I'm sorry for the careless things that I might have said. And my position was, I've never been hurt by a careless word that you've said. What I've been hurt by is your theology, that at your seminaries, you teach people that they bring to others that winds up being a scaffolding of abuse. And that was my personal experience. So I'm not making wide sweeping statements here, but I wrote them and I said, these are the three biblical issues that were used against me as a survivor by pastors and churches. Please take some time, concentrated prayer, as Dr. Patterson said that wives in abusive situations ought to do. Take that same medicine that you're giving me, devote it, put yourself on your knees and pray through those and look to determine, is our interpretation really good? Is there a better way to serve survivors? Is there a better way to serve those who harm them? Because we have to include both people and we have to minister to the needs of both. Their needs are very different. But we should never lose sight. Both individuals have inestimable worth before God. I received nothing. And one of the board of trustees was the pastor who performed the wedding ceremony for my mom. I had a family connection, and like we sent a separate nothing, crickets. So I sent it to all of the seminary presidents. Not even the requisite thank you for your concern. Duly noted, Lieutenant. I got nothing.
Yeah. Well, you're challenging the power base.
And there have been survivors who are far more vocal than I have.
Sure.
And they don't get silence. They get shamed. They get vilified. They get humiliated.
So it comes down basically to, and not to simplify abuse, but it's a matter of we have lost respect for one another. I mean, if I'm going to abuse you, it's because I disrespect you. We need to respect these boundaries and respect these situations. I mean, sexual abuse is a problem everywhere, and the church is not outside of that. I mean, the church deals with that. Our local entity may or may not, but it's everywhere, and it's involved in so many things, and it can be from something that people might not say is abuse to something that we would obviously agree is abuse. And I think there's a level of, I heard something happen the other day where an individual was, saying that makes me uncomfortable. And it was, the boy was sitting in a chair next to her assigned by the teacher, but that makes me uncomfortable. And I think we put words into young ones, in a way that they don't understand what they're saying either. And so, but we have to understand that the uncomfortable level is something that we have to be aware of, that if we're making somebody uncomfortable, I think we need to be aware if we're doing that, because sometimes we may not be aware that we're doing that. But how do we give a voice to somebody who's feeling that uncomfortableness, the ability to speak?
Mm-hmm. And one way that we do that is making sure that people who occupy positions of power have not abused power in sexual ways before, right. and in any number of ways. And I think it is important that we give our children language to express discomfort. I think it's important that we respect the language that they do have, and that we give them some agency and some respect for their own bodies, and know that their bodies are precious. And just because they're small doesn't mean that they are property.
Right. So how do we safeguard? What are some things that you're finding or you express in your areas? What are some ways that we can safeguard against this at the local level?
So this is not coming from my research. This is coming from the ERLC convention or conference that I attended a couple of years ago. 2 words: ministry safe.
Yep.
Over and over and over. Ministry safe, ministry safe. It's in the show notes.
And we use their background checks, but I think that that's just one level. Mm-hmm. There are other things that need to be done at the local level too.
Yes. We need to be very, very careful how we do our drop-offs and pickups. And at the nursery, I know, y'all, that's a pain. Again, I've got 6 kids. I can't tell you the number of hours I've logged as a nursery worker.
Right.
And it would be so handy to be able to hand that sweet little baby over the Dutch door to their 14-year-old sibling. That's not safe practice. We have to grab ourselves out of the 1950s and 70s where everybody knew everyone and it was a small town, and churches were considered safe places.
Right.
But because we have been so lax with child safety, churches are no longer regarded as safe places by young parents, and we need to understand what parents expect.
Right.
And Ministry Safe has some wonderful safeguards that they can help churches employ in their children's ministries to make sure that it's not just the appearance of safety. Oh, we do background checks. But you know what? A sexual abuser can commit a number of crimes
and never be convicted.
Never be convicted.
And so they're never on the background check.
Right. So background checks are really important, but that's like base level.
But awareness of the grooming process is what Ministry
key.
Safe can also train people to understand
and
to become aware of, so that we can see it before it's happening.
Mm-hmm. And it's important, and Rachel Denhollander brought this up in the conference a couple of years ago. It's important that we actually have an application process and we ask hard questions. And by doing that, by asking the difficult questions, often those who have perpetrated or are maybe looking at the church as an avenue to perpetrate will self-select off the nursery committee because they just don't want to deal. So we can put up fences and gates to protect our kids, and we may never even know our effectiveness.
As one individual that I knew years ago, Sherry Babb from Oklahoma, she was a childhood specialist in Oklahoma for a lot of years. Her statement was, we have to do better for our babies.
Yes.
And I think that that's so true. We have to take up the hard questions and take up the hard lines so that we do better for our babies, whether that's a 7-month-old or a 17-year-old.
That's right.
We have to do better for our babies and realize that if we don't protect the next generation, what generation will we have left?
Exactly right.
We've already seen the increase of the nuns, NONES, choosing no religion at all. At its highest point is now in our teenage group, the Gen Z group. And, how much of that is because of our own practices that we have to deal with, and we're going to have to answer for, and we're going to have to raise our own awareness of some of our culpability in that.
And I will tell you, as I'm not a messenger. I've never been a messenger, but just by watching this process unfold, I'm having to do some deep soul searching about whether or not I want to continue to associate myself, whether
Sure.
I want my cooperative program
Sure.
money to support an executive committee that takes 14 days to do the right thing.
Right. Right. And that's fair. And I know there's a lot of people that are in that same boat. And that's because at the end of the day, to remove ourselves from that causes harm then to our mission efforts.
That's right.
On the other side. So thankfully we can designate where our money goes, and we can designate where it doesn't go.
Nice.
If that's something that we choose to do. So, personally or corporately, we can say, I want all of my money to go to the 2 mission fields, or I want my money to just not fund this, but I want it to do everything else Southern Baptist and so I'm thankful we have the freedom and flexibility to do that.
And those are conversations that need to occur at the local level. And if the executive committee is intensely concerned about their fiduciary responsibilities, this is one way for churches to help them understand that it's not just
help guide them in their awareness.
Guide them in their understanding of what their fiduciaries.
Well, I do think, and I hope that while it was absurd in my mind to take 14 days to choose that, I think that they and we have all learned something through that. And to me, as bad as this one is, it's if they repeat such an action on another issue, to me, that's more egregious. It's like, okay, let's learn from what happened here and let's not repeat that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm waiting for the next big issue that will rise up, because it's coming, I'm sure.
It will. Yes.
And how are they going to respond on that one? So, Christine, thank you for being with us today. It's informative, and as always, our conversations I enjoy, and you challenge us all to think deeply and to think appropriately. So thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. We will see you tomorrow, and have a great day today.